Hello, everyone. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. If you are joining us live, you can put any comments, questions, any things you have to say about the wonderful content you'll be seeing tonight. You can put that in the chat. We will respond live. We have about a half hour of Nurse Jordan's time. So, Nurse Jordan, if you can please tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that we just got to hang out with you a little bit earlier this month, but just tell us a little bit about yourself, your role here at Family Source, and your role kind of outside of Family Source as well.
Yeah, totally. So I am a nurse. I'm one of the nurses with the intake for the surrogate side, and I get to help do the medical reviews for Family Source and get people ready to move on to matching. I'm also part of the match team, so as we get profiles to surrogates, then we coordinate match meetings. As far as personally, not only do I have experience as a labor and delivery nurse focused to postpartum, I'm also a lactation consultant, and I think postpartum really just kind of like triggered that passion and lack of education. I'm also a 3-time surrogate. So my first journey for surrogacy was for a French couple who I carried twins for. So I got to exclusively pump with multiples, was a fun one. And then I completed my second surrogacy journey last summer. And then I just was reminded of the love that I have for surrogacy so much that I was like, let's do this again. So we just had an embryo transfer for my third journey.
Oh my gosh. So you're not busy at all then.
Not even a little.
Well, we appreciate you joining us tonight. And again, last we spoke, we did a similar session, and it was specifically focusing on lactation for surrogates. So tonight, I'm really excited to talk to you about lactation as it relates to the intended parent's perspective. So if we can get started then, just tell us a little bit about just kind of like broad strokes of pumping versus not pumping versus breastfeeding, and what factors intended parents should consider when they're deciding which option might be best for them.
So there's lots of options. You can have that crucial conversation either with your case manager or your surrogate directly on if you want pumped breast milk through your surrogacy. There is the option for intended parents to lactate or relactate themselves. So if they've had a baby before but are struggling, that is something that you can do with IBCLC and combination care with your OB or your IVF physician to help yourself relactate. There's also not doing any of those options and choosing to just do formula because it's easier for your lifestyle. But I always joke, a fed baby is a happy baby. So whatever route is best for you, there's so many that it's not uncommon for people to really think about what suits their lifestyle. It kind of triggers a comment in nursing school. I had a classmate ask me, because at the time I had been pumping while in clinical for my own twins, because I had my own twins after having the surrogate twins. She asked me, how do you handle breastfeeding and pumping? I just don't ever see myself putting my baby to my breast. And I was like, you don't necessarily have to put your baby to breast. Exclusive pumping is an option, and it's actually getting more and more common. So, yeah, sorry, had to highlight that.
I think people don't realize that that is an option. And with surrogacy, if folks are choosing to feed their baby with breast milk, I think exclusively pumping is the most common way.
Yep.
Yeah. So that makes sense. So you had brought up induced lactation. So can you talk a little bit more about that? That intended parents have the ability to actually pump or breastfeed themselves if they choose. Is that right?
Yes, it is a possibility. I don't know a lot about it, but it does take a lot of dedication. In my career as a nurse, I've actually only seen it happen one time in an adoption situation. It just opens the door. So if the intended mom who's been struggling to conceive wants to try to induce lactation, it is a time-consuming and timely managed thing. So, like, you have to be on birth control typically for about 6 months, and then they give you some hormone regimens that kind of replicate as if you're delivering a placenta to help induce, and then you still have to have that discipline to pump on a regular basis to stimulate the nipple line. And there's not enough studies on it, but you can be successful, but you don't know unless you try. So.
Yeah, but it sounds like it's not something that someone would decide when the baby's born.
Yeah, it's definitely something that, like, you know, if you have an embryo transfer coming up either for yourself or for a surrogate or whatever your situation is, you would want to be thinking about it around the time of your embryo transfer, or if that's the avenue that you want to take, because you want to have milk established before baby gets here to know if you're actually going to have enough for baby when they get here.
I just think it's so fascinating that that's even an option. So good to know. I certainly didn't until I got into the surrogacy community. So, so you mentioned there is, I think, this idea that like breast milk is the best way to go. But can you talk like actually about the differences and benefits between formula versus breast milk?
Yeah. So I'm one of those lactation consultants that a fed baby but is best, and it's mostly because of that biological availability that the nutrients have for baby. Whereas, like, having formula, it doesn't necessarily help their gut bacteria, and there's not as many nutrients that are as easy to process through their body as if it was for breast milk. So typically, like, a breastfed baby tends to have a more loose stool, and that's just because breast milk in general is a natural laxative. It's also known to have like a factor in it that when you have baby consume breast milk for the first time, it will line their GI system with good bacteria to prevent bad bacteria from being able to cause more issues for baby.
So it does sound like there are differences, but it also sounds like don't panic if breast milk is not the route that you choose.
Exactly.
Perfect. So then, all that considered, what is it okay to mix? Like, do you have to choose one or the other?
No, you can mix. I actually personally was a mixer for, not only did I experience that as my intended parents for my first journey, since they were international, they knew like a week or two before they left, they wanted to start mixing so that it wasn't a harsh transition. I also personally did a lot of mixing because I either was weaning or felt like my supply wasn't sufficed for everybody, so I was supplementing. The biggest factors to concern when you're mixing your breast milk and formula, though, is that the shelf life will be less when it's mixed. Example would be like you mix up your formula. Typically, depending on the instructions, they're only good to sit out once made and warmed up for about an hour. Breast milk, when you have it freshly pumped, can sit out for about 4 hours. But if you mix that fresh pumped milk with the formula, it's only good for an hour. So if you're worried about waste, that's something to consider. But mixing is never a bad thing. It's a really good tool to use if you're weaning, transitioning baby from like, okay, this isn't going well, I want to do formula, versus having that like harsh adjustment to breast milk to formula. So.
I had no idea that you could mix I knew that people breastfed and did formula, but I didn't realize that you could literally mix them. This is
Yes.
very cool.
You do want to, like, I guess when you're mixing them, you want to make sure that your formula is mixed and prepared correctly before you just dump in your breast milk. So like you wouldn't want to heat up the water, put the breast milk in, and then mix the formula. You'd want to mix each one or heat up each one individually and then merge them together.
Mm-hmm.
So
do you, so we talked about breast milk and then formula. Can you talk about what colostrum is and how that fits into all of this?
Absolutely. So colostrum is rightly called like a newborn milk. It's typically starting to be produced in the pregnant woman between 18 and 24 weeks. Colostrum is just really thick and it's more yellow than like a traditional breast milk. It's very high in antibodies, and components are there more to protect babies from bad pathogens and germs. And like I mentioned earlier, it's very well known to giving babies loose stool, as it can be a natural laxative. I did pull out like a little pocketbook, so I'm just going to kind of bring it to the screen. So maybe if it'll let me.
I know, with the background, it makes things tricky. You might have to turn off your virtual background.
I have a picture. Maybe I'll just post it on the post after. But
we can put it in the comments afterwards.
Yes, it's mostly going over the shades of colostrum, what transitional milk can look like, and then what typical breast milk would look like. But colostrum itself is just 2 times as much protein in it. It has 4 times as much zinc. It's lower in fat and sugar, so it's easier for a baby to digest. Typically, colostrum milk does not last long. Your breast milk can start to come in anywhere from 2 to 4 days after delivery. But some studies are showing that transitional milk can last up to 14 days. And in some cases, women have been found to still have colostrum present in their milk up to 6 weeks.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like colostrum is what happens first for newborns. So even if like an intended parent can't or is choosing not to take any actual like breast milk after baby leaves the hospital, it sounds like there's still value maybe in those first couple days of getting the colostrum. Is that accurate?
Yes, literally liquid gold for baby.
That is very good to know. I honestly also didn't realize that those are drastically different things in a lot of ways from breast milk and colostrum, the value and the differences there. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
And just a reminder for folks watching live, if you put any question or comments or thoughts in the comments of where you're watching, we'll be able to see that. We can respond live as well. But I do have a few more questions that I'm excited to ask. So how long do intended parents typically accept breast milk that's pumped from the surrogate? Is that like a year thing? Is it a week by week thing? What are people typically doing?
It's really up to the intended parents and the surrogate and having like an agreement on what they would like. Personally, my first 2 journeys were intended parents that were international. So knowing that I'm a typical overproducer, I arranged plans for my milk after they left the States because I can't ship milk internationally. So for me, my intended parents specifically were about 6 weeks, give or take. But I have heard of lots of surrogates who are getting close to that 1 year mark. So it's really just up to like how long do the intended parents want to feed breast milk to baby? How long does the surrogate want to pump? Because it can be time consuming. But it can range anywhere. Like I have a couple of coworkers that did it like 6 months. But it really is just up to like, you don't want to cause yourself as a surrogate to be so mentally drained just because you're doing this one thing. But you also, as an intended parent, don't want to be like, well, I'm paying hundreds of dollars to get all of this form or this breast milk. Is it really saving me like, is it stressing me out, or is it benefiting baby enough that it doesn't bother me? So definitely considering what avenue is more appropriate for you and what you're wanting go a long way. Another thing you could consider with that is, like, do you have the storage? As an intended parent, do you have a deep freezer or a standing freezer big enough to store hundreds and hundreds of ounces of milk? Because sometimes that's what it can get to, especially knowing that exclusive pumpers are not necessarily draining one side at a time like you would if you were breastfeeding. They're draining both sides, so you're tricking your body into thinking that you're feeding twins. So you're going to have that accumulation of milk happen a lot faster than if you were breastfeeding and pumping the opposite side.
So pro tip on the freezer piece, I know I got mine on Facebook Marketplace. So you may have like a local board where you could easily get a secondhand freezer. And then I ended up selling mine afterwards. So I actually didn't really have to spend money on it. I was kind of just borrowing it before I resold it. So
great idea.
They definitely make them, and you definitely need one if you're going to be either on the pumping side as a surrogate or if you're going to be receiving it as an intended parent.
Yep. And that's one thing to really consider too, is like, how frequently is your surrogate going to be sending milk to you? Does she have the appropriate options for storing it for however long you guys agree before she sends you more? Is she sending it weekly? Is she sending it bi-weekly? Is she sending it every 3 days? Like, how much storage does she have as well? Like for my international parents, at my first journey, I was living in an apartment, so I just had my one little teeny tiny freezer. By the end of the week, I was like, I need to empty things out or else I can't fit food in here. Mm-hmm. So I was meeting with my intended parents every few days just to ensure that I had room for our normal food.
Important things.
But there's also consideration for the intended parents too, because if you're international and you're staying in an Airbnb or a hotel, how much freezer space do you have available to you for your newborn's milk?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Those are definitely factors to consider, I think, if you're an intended parent. So then with other supplies, what other types of supplies and things like that should intended parents be considering that they might need to provide for the surrogate?
So some typical supplies would be anything that really affiliates with their pump. And every pump is a little bit different. So some of them have like little membranes that like encourage the suction on the inside, and they break down pretty easily. So like the membranes could be replaced, or the flanges, maybe the surrogate is getting mastitis or engorgement because they're not draining properly. So it's possible they could ask for reimbursement on getting proper flange sizes for their pump. Storage bags are pretty much the number one thing to consider that you're helping with replenishing. In rare cases, it could be shipping supplies. So if you're within the States, you can have the milk shipped to you. There's options for that. Are you going to have yourself just send everything you need to the surrogate so that she has everything and then ships it back to you? Have the surrogate go buy all those items and then ship it to you? Or there's even some third-party programs right now, like milk store. I don't remember all of them. There's a few of them out there when you research them, but they literally give you like a package deal where they supply the bags, the box, the shipping label, the insulation for the box so that the milk doesn't go bad within the day or two that it's taking to ship it. But it can be a little bit more expensive. But that's where it's like expense versus stress. Would you rather stress about making sure you have all the supplies, or stress about the money?
Right. Yeah, the convenience, definitely there's a cost associated with that, right?
Yep.
So, and it sounds like internationally milk cannot be shipped. So that's a kind of hard and fast rule, but from state to state, it could be.
Yes.
And like you mentioned, there's a few different ways to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I know we mentioned it in the last lactation um, event, but there's also the options of, say, maybe you don't have the freezer space. There's now companies out there that will take milk and turn it into powder form. So then you have a breast milk powder that you can now travel with. So maybe you don't have the freezer space, but you want to supply yourself with stuff for on the go that's still just as biologically available for your family. So
So it's essentially like formula in that way, in that it's a powder, but it's breast milk.
Yep.
That is just wild every time I hear about it. I love that.
That just makes my heart so excited because that's a newer science, and I just think it's the coolest thing.
Oh yeah, I think really there's so much about lactation that just isn't talked about or isn't like explored very much. And so I again, this whole topic just completely fascinates me every time we talk about it. So with that, then I know that some intended parents either, just haven't needed to think too much about lactation and like how it works because they haven't been the one going through it or won't be the one going through it, whether that's by choice or not. But can you talk a little bit about like the mechanics of it up front? I know one thing that's come up that I've seen in some chats that I've seen online specifically is like the idea of pumping versus maybe putting the baby to the breast in the hospital of like with the surrogate. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Is that something that a lot of surrogates and intended parents are doing? I know some people feel weird about it. What's your take on that?
So it really just depends on the situation. When I think back to like my labor and delivery experience, baby being skin to skin is really important for that first hour or two of life. And that's not just because of like the benefits to the carrier for their milk production, but just being skin to skin helps them regulate their temperature, helps regulate their sugars. It keeps them more calm because they just had a massive life change. So, if the intended parents are not present, having that skin to skin, I have seen it and heard about it. As far as putting baby to breast, personally, I did put my first surrogate babies to breast, but I did it with permission. So I ended up having the
important part.
Yeah, I had the twins early, and so the dads weren't even supposed to fly in for a few more days. And so they had to change all their flights, but it was still going to be like 19 hours before they could get here. So I asked them with one of their twins being what we call SGA, which is just small for gestational age. I asked them if I could put her to breast, knowing that the milk transfer would be more efficient for her versus me trying to express what is really thick colostrum and trying to feed her drops. With smaller babies, we typically are watching their weight a lot closer, their intake a lot closer, their sugars potentially. And then sometimes on the more severe side, like as a nurse, if they're small enough, they typically have to do like a Carson challenge as well. So there's just a lot of extra things that they do for babies when they're smaller or late preterm. So I personally did put babies to breast, but it was just because it put more benefit to baby. And I also did it as more of like this is just a transaction for baby to get what they need until dads get here, because then it's strictly me pumping and then dads can feed baby. But it's not always the case for everybody. If your intended parents are present, you don't necessarily need to do skin to skin with your baby. Have the parents do skin to skin. With that in mind, sorry, my brain's going to the surrogate with delivery. It is super important that if you plan to be pumping, you should be stimulating the breast within an hour of delivering your placenta. And I know that sometimes that can be really hard, but if you wait, like say you have a C-section, and you wait till the next morning to start pumping, you've already kind of missed your window, and it can limit that milk supply that you're starting. So trying to make up the time by being more regular on pumping is hard, but if you can hit that golden hour, it can really help. So to go back to your question, I apologize. It's not very common, but I have had it happen. I have seen it not just in myself, but with other surrogates. But it is also up to the intended parents on if that's acceptable.
And it sounds like it's very circumstantial. I think you made some really good points about is it, are the parents here? What if they're not here yet? That might impact, what can happen and who's feeding the baby and how the baby is getting fed. Now, okay, real talk for a second, because I know this comes up. Like, did putting the baby to breast make you want to take that baby home anymore? I know I've heard that question before.
Personally, no, but that's also because you go into this as a surrogate. You're not like conceiving this baby with your spouse or your partner like you normally, like there's that lack of intimacy. But I know that like when you go into your IVF situation and you're watching that little baby embryo get put inside of you, there's still an attachment, but like a different kind of attachment. I think personally, I just fell more in love with the intended parents. And that although I still love this baby just as much, I think that having that bond with just the whole family is still a connection. But putting that baby to breast specifically was not like, I want to take you home. That's not how it felt. And it was kind of like a bittersweet that yes, the intended parents missed the birth and it's not at all what we were hoping for. But I still think that having that like 20 hours of just me and the twins and my nurse was kind of like a closing moment of like, I get to watch you grow up the rest of your life potentially. So it was really gratifying. I remember specifically with the surrogate twins that my mom, like, since they missed the delivery, I had a photographer come in and do a photo shoot of them meeting their babies for the first time, and I was just bawling my eyes out. And my mom asked me, are you crying because you're giving up the baby? And I said, no, we've worked for almost 2 years to get to this point, and it's here. We're witnessing all the love in the room. And I think that for me is what the attachment is about. It's not about, oh, I'm going to get pregnant with someone else's baby and then I want to keep them. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes sense. I mean, so I was a one-time surrogate and it makes perfect sense to me, but I think there's this misconception out there that, once baby is breastfeeding, that the surrogate's going to change their mind or feel some sort of different type of way than they felt the entire time. So I thank you for sharing that. And I do think it's just a conversation about comfortability and, what that looks like. So it can be very different under different circumstances.
10,000%. Like if going in that you put that baby to breast and it's not going to be a good outcome for you, then don't even risk it. But just knowing that is an option, like in the worst case scenario, it has been heard of. So you don't have to feel like, oh my God, I'm the only one that's done this. Don't feel that way. You're not alone. People have done it. Intended parents have approved it before. Some intended parents are like, no, please find another option. And there are those options. So
yeah, and we've talked about lots of them. So there's also a hormone drop that I wasn't expecting the next day. I don't know if you experienced this as well, but that's good to keep in mind too. I know, like you said, that there were tears afterwards, and I think there were tears on my end after my journey wrapped up as well, but it was not because I was missing a baby. So I think that's an interesting point as well to bring up. I think that's something between surrogates and intended parents that just comes up. So it's a journey for everybody.
All the time. They're like, it's so weird to me that that's a question. I'm like, they'd be surprised how many people, they don't understand the process. So that is their question.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're coming to the end of our time here. So is there any additional advice you would give to intended parents as they're considering what they want to do regarding pumping, food, feeding their baby? What advice do you have to give?
The first couple days is really stressful when it comes to lactation and feeding your baby, but I feel like highlighting like stomach size. So I have these little beads that talk about baby stomach size. So the top one is white. I know you can't really see it. Maybe if I go a direction.
There you go. Got it. Yeah.
So this top one is baby stomach size for the first day of life, and it can a suffice amount of liquid for feeding could be anywhere from like 6 mils to about 10 to 15 mils max per feed, about every 3 hours. By day 3 of life, this feed here is about the size of baby's stomach. And so then typically they're taking, about 15 to 25 mils per feed. So still less than 2 ounces, or even less than an ounce, actually. And then this last one is about baby's stomach size for day 5 of life. And typically your milk is already in by that point. So their full intake would be closer to like 30 mils plus. So anywhere from like 30 to 45 mils, like an ounce to an ounce and a half, is about average by day 5. So just knowing that, babies really can live off drops. So stressing about like, oh my gosh, is my baby getting enough? Or my surrogate only got like 12 mils. That's a great feed. That's a great amount of milk. And I know that not only do surrogates typically start to worry about, am I making enough for baby, but then intended parents can also be stressed about, is my baby actually getting enough? Should I be supplementing? Do I want to start formula right now? As a nurse, I know that we typically watch for those things of like, is baby showing signs of low sugar? Are they dropping weight too fast? Babies will typically lose 7 to 10% of their body weight, and then they gain that back by 2 weeks. So just remembering that unless there's negative things happening with baby, that baby is more than likely getting enough.
Yeah, I think that's the stress, I don't think can be emphasized enough. It's experienced afterwards. I mean, it's like truly any new parent, they're right in that boat. They've been intended parents this whole time, and it's been a different type of journey to get the baby. But then once the baby is there, it's a very similar experience to me being completely confused and overwhelmed with my own children. I feel like, is that about right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So don't panic. There are people here for you. And it sounds like lactation consultants can be helpful for intended parents as well. Is that right?
Yes, 10,000%. So whether it's you are working with our agency as an intended parent or as a surrogate, you guys are more than welcome to reach out to us at Family Source. We now have 2 CLCs on staff. And then when it comes to like, I need local support, there's a lot of new options for getting virtual consults. Or you can look into a CLC or an IBCLC local to you to see if they have an outpatient business or an outpatient screening, so that you can get the assistance that you're needing if you're worried about baby not getting enough, or if you're worried about, I'm really sore, what can I do? Making sure you have proper flange sizing, things like that. That's what we're here for. We're here for everybody to feel supported, because this is not an easy journey. It's a full-time job when you think about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we appreciate your support and knowledge as always, and I'm sure that we will get something on the calendar in the next couple weeks to revisit some of these topics. And I know there's topics that we didn't even have the opportunity to get into tonight. So I look forward to continuing this conversation. And thank you so much, Nurse Jordan, for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate the help.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.